The old hospital stood cloaked in shadow, a beacon of unease in the stillness of the night. Rohan, a young nurse, started his shift. He always felt a chill down his spine as he walked these halls. Stories of the hospital's haunted past were common, whispers of an abandoned wing consumed by fire years ago. Rohan, a man of science, dismissed them as mere superstition. He had never seen any evidence of the supernatural. Tonight that would change. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of disinfectant and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Rohan began his rounds, checking on patients. His footsteps echoed in the eerie silence. Each room he passed felt colder, the air growing denser. A sense of dread began to creep into his heart. He shook it off, trying to focus on his duties. But the feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing moment. The silence of the hospital was broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. Rohan paused at the nurse's station, making notes on a patient's chart. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He felt a presence, a coldness that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. He turned, his heart pounding. There was nothing there, just the empty hallway stretching out before him like a yawning abyss. He tried to ignore the feeling, telling himself it was just his imagination. He continued his rounds, but the feeling persisted, growing stronger with every step. Then he heard it, a whisper, faint and indistinct, his name. He stopped, holding his breath, listening intently. The whisper came again, closer this time. His blood ran cold. He spun around, searching for the source of the voice. The hallway was empty. He was alone, or was he? Fear tightened its grip on his chest. He tried to rationalize, to find a logical explanation, a draft perhaps playing tricks on his ears. But deep down he knew the truth. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Rohan's rounds took him to room 306. An elderly woman, Mrs. Hathaway, lay sleeping peacefully. He checked her vitals, noting her steady breathing. Everything seemed to be in order. He stepped back from the bed, a wave of dizziness washing over him. The whispering returned, louder this time, seeming to come from right behind him. He whirled around, his heart pounding in his chest. The room was empty, except it wasn't. Mrs. Hathaway's bed was empty. The sheets were rumpled, as if she had just been there moments before, but there was no sign of her. Panic surged through him. He raced into the hallway, his mind racing. Where could she have gone? How could she have vanished into thin air? He searched the immediate vicinity, his heart pounding in his ears. He checked the nearby restrooms, the waiting area, even the stairwells. There was no sign of her. He returned to the nurse's station, his mind reeling. He had to report this, but what could he say? That an elderly patient had vanished into thin air? He knew how it would sound. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the phone. He needed to think, to come up with a plan. But his mind was a jumble of fear and confusion. He walked slowly, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He felt a presence here, watching him, following his every move. He could hear the whispers again, clearer now, swirling around him like the smoke that still seemed to linger in the air. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. Cobwebs hung from every corner, shrouding the dilapidated furniture in ghostly drapes. The remnants of the fire were everywhere, charred walls, blackened beams, and the lingering scent of smoke. He pulled the metal, groaning in protest. The air grew noticeably colder, a musty, oppressive weight settling over him. He took a deep breath and stepped inside. He made his way to the end of the hallway. A heavy metal door, rusted and sealed with chains, marked the entrance to the forbidden wing. A shiver ran down his spine as he reached for the chains. They felt cold, almost damp, as if they hadn't been touched in years. He knew it was foolish, reckless even, but something drew him to that forgotten place. He had to know. Unable to shake the unease fueled by the missing patient and the whispers, Rohan remembered the stories. The abandoned wing, a fire, hushed up, forgotten. Could there be a connection? I ventured deeper into the abandoned wing. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath my feet, each step sending a fresh wave of chills down my spine. He reached a room at the end of the hallway. Its door hung precariously from one hinge, a silent invitation into the unknown. I pushed it open, my heart pounding. The room was dimly lit by a sliver of moonlight filtering through a boarded-up window. Dust motes danced in the pale light, revealing the skeletal remains of a hospital bed. And then he saw it. A shadow, darker than the surrounding darkness, crouched in the corner. It was human-shaped, but there was something about it that sent shivers down his spine. Something unnatural, unsettling. The shadow turned, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw a pair of eyes glinting in the darkness. Eyes filled with a cold, ancient hunger. He stumbled back, his heart racing. He wanted to scream, to run, but his feet felt rooted to the spot. The shadow rose, its form shifting and swirling like smoke. I watched in terror as it glided towards me, its cold, ethereal touch sending a jolt of fear through my very core. I fled the abandoned wing, my mind reeling from the encounter. I couldn't explain what I'd seen, couldn't comprehend the darkness that seemed to permeate the very walls of the hospital. He returned to the nurses' station, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had to tell someone, anyone, about what he had experienced. But the words wouldn't come. He felt a strange mix of terror and disbelief, as if he were trapped in a nightmare. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chaos subsided. The nurses on duty returned from their break, their faces etched with concern as they saw my state. He tried to speak, to explain, but they were already ushering him into a chair, their voices calm and reassuring. They told me I looked pale, overworked, that I should take a few deep breaths, relax, and then the final blow. Mrs. Hathaway was back in her room, sleeping peacefully, as if nothing had happened. The nurses, oblivious to his terror, chatted about their break, their words washing over him like waves on a distant shore. He stared at them, at Mrs. Hathaway's chart, his mind struggling to reconcile what he had seen, what he had felt, with the normalcy that now surrounded him. The whispers, the shadow, the abandoned wing, it all felt like a fever dream, a figment of his imagination. Exhausted, but unable to shake the night's events, I went home as the sun rose. I tried to dismiss it all as a hallucination, a trick of the mind in the dead of night. But the whispers, the shadow, the overwhelming sense of dread, it all felt too real. He couldn't escape the feeling that he had stumbled upon something ancient, something evil lurking beneath the surface of the mundane. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were haunted by the burning wing, by the feeling of icy fingers brushing against his skin, by the image of a woman engulfed in flames, her screams echoing in the silence of his mind. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding, the scent of smoke lingering in my nostrils. I couldn't shake the feeling that the hospital, the whispering ward, was reaching out to me, its darkness seeping into my waking life. He tried to focus on his day, on the normalcy of his life outside the hospital walls. But the fear lingered, a constant shadow following him wherever he went. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, listening for whispers in the wind, his mind playing tricks on him, blurring the lines between reality and nightmare. Days turned into weeks. The memory of that night faded, but the fear remained. Rohan couldn't bring himself to return to the hospital, couldn't face the whispering corridors and the shadows that lurked within. The hospital administration, citing exhaustion and stress, granted him a leave of absence. I spent my days haunted by unanswered questions, by the chilling certainty that I had only glimpsed the surface of something sinister. I tried to piece together the fragments of that night. The whispers, the shadow, the missing patient. They were all pieces of a puzzle I couldn't solve. He researched the hospital's history, scouring old newspapers and archives, searching for any mention of a fire, a tragedy, anything that could explain the darkness that clung to its walls. But his search yielded nothing but dead ends and unanswered questions. The hospital remained, a silent sentinel against the skyline, its windows dark and empty. I often found myself drawn back to its gates, compelled by an unseen force to confront the horrors I knew lurked within. But the fear was too great, the scars of that night still too raw. He would turn away, the unanswered questions gnawing at his soul, the whispers of the ward forever echoing in the darkest corners of his mind. The whispering ward remained, a place of shadows and secrets, its history shrouded in mystery. Rohan never returned, the memory of that night forever etched into his soul. I carried the fear with me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lay hidden beneath the surface of the ordinary. The whispers continued, he knew, carried on the wind, echoing through the empty corridors of the abandoned wing, a testament to the horrors that lay hidden within the walls of the whispering ward. The hospital stood as a chilling reminder that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, some doors are better left unopened, and some whispers are best left unheard. Dr. Anaya Patel clutched her stethoscope, heart pounding with excitement. Durham General Hospital. It was a dream come true. The grand old building with its ivy-covered walls held the promise of a prestigious career. Anaya, fresh out of med school, was eager to prove herself. Her mentor, the renowned Dr. Mehra, had taken her under his wing. He saw her potential, her unwavering dedication. Anaya was determined to make him proud. The hospital bustled with activity. Doctors and nurses rushed through the corridors. The air hummed with the low murmur of medical equipment. It was exhilarating. Anaya felt a surge of adrenaline. This was where she belonged, among the healers, the lifesavers. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders, but she welcomed it. She was ready for the challenge. "There's something you should know," a senior nurse whispered to Anaya one evening. Her name was Martha, and she had been at Durham General for decades, her face etched with the stories of countless patients. Anaya had noticed the wary glances towards Operating Theatre 4, the hushed tones whenever it was mentioned. Now Martha confirmed her suspicions. There was something strange about that theatre. "Never go in there after midnight," Martha warned, her voice barely a whisper, "especially not alone." Anaya, though sceptical, couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The hospital was old, with a history that whispered through the corridors. Still, she was a woman of science. Ghosts and goblins were the stuff of fairy tales, weren't they? Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The hospital's corridors echoed with the usual hustle and bustle, but beneath the surface something was amiss. Anaya thrived in the fast-paced environment, her confidence growing with each passing day. She was known for her precision and dedication, earning the respect of her peers and superiors alike. Yet the mystery of Operating Theatre 4 lingered in the back of her mind. It was a puzzle she couldn't ignore, a shadow that loomed over her otherwise bright career. The strange occurrences started subtly. A misplaced chart here, a flickering light there. At first they seemed like mere coincidences, the kind of minor mishaps that happen in any busy hospital. Then patients began to disappear. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Their beds were left in disarray, their personal belongings untouched. One day they were there, prepped for surgery, their names on the schedule, their charts meticulously filled out. The next, their beds were empty, their files gone. It was as if they had been erased from existence, leaving the staff bewildered and anxious. The disappearances sent a chill down Anaya's spine. She couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play, something beyond the realm of normal hospital operations. She felt a knot of dread in her stomach. The hospital, once a place of healing and hope, now felt like a labyrinth of unanswered questions and growing fears. It was Dr. Mera's disappearance that pushed her over the edge. He was a seasoned professional, well respected and reliable. His sudden absence was a blow to the entire staff. He had been scheduled for a routine procedure, one he had performed countless times before. There was no reason for him to vanish without a trace. But when the time came, he was nowhere to be found. The operating room stood ready, the instruments laid out, but Dr. Mera was missing. The operating room stood empty, the air thick with an eerie silence. It was as if the room itself held its breath, waiting for something to break the stillness. Anaya felt a surge of panic. Something was terribly wrong. The hospital, her sanctuary, had become a place of fear and uncertainty. She knew she had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Sleep evaded Anaya. She paced her apartment, her mind racing. The hospital, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a menacing labyrinth. Dr. Mera's disappearance haunted her. Where could he be? Then she remembered his pager. He always kept it clipped to his belt. She had to go back to the hospital, find that pager. Maybe it held a clue. The hospital corridors were eerily silent in the dead of night. Anaya's footsteps echoed on the linoleum floor as she made her way to Dr. Mera's office. The pager lay on the floor just outside Operating Theatre 4. Beside it, strange symbols were etched into the floor. They were faint, almost invisible, but undeniably there. Anaya's breath caught in her throat. Fear gnawed at the edges of her composure. Anaya's hand trembled as she reached for the door handle of Operating Theatre 4. Her breath hitched, and her heart pounded in her chest like a drum. She had heard the stories, the whispers of what lay beyond this door, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality she was about to face. A cold draught seeped from under the door, sending shivers down her spine. The chill seemed to carry with it the echoes of past horrors, making her skin crawl. She hesitated, feeling the weight of dread pressing down on her shoulders. Ignoring the voice screaming at her to turn back, she pushed the door open. The creak of the hinges sounded like a wail in the silence, amplifying her fear. She stepped inside, her eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The air inside was heavy, stale, and thick with the metallic scent of blood. It was as if the room itself was alive, breathing in sync with her own ragged breaths. The oppressive atmosphere made it hard to think, hard to move. The operating table stood in the centre of the room, but it wasn't the gleaming steel that made Anaya's stomach churn. It was the dark stains that marred its surface, telling tales of unspeakable acts performed in this very spot. Jars filled with preserved organs lined the shelves, their contents floating in murky liquids. Each jar seemed to hold a piece of a nightmare, a fragment of a horror story that had been sealed away, yet still very much alive. Surgical tools, old and tarnished, lay scattered on a table. They were relics of a dark past, instruments of pain and suffering, their edges dulled by time but still menacing in their appearance. In the centre of the room, a circle of candles flickered, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. The flames danced as if mocking her, their light revealing more than just the physical horrors, but the very essence of fear itself. This wasn't a place of healing. It was a place where nightmares were born, where the line between life and death was blurred beyond recognition. It was a chamber of horrors, a place that had seen more pain and suffering than any human should ever witness. Anaya knew she had to uncover its secrets, no matter the cost. The surgeon's legacy. Anaya's heart pounded against her ribs as she approached a dusty bookcase tucked in the corner. She ran her fingers along the spines of the old leather-bound volumes. One book, its cover devoid of any markings, seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. As she opened it, a musty smell assaulted her nostrils. The pages, yellowed with age, contained the scrawled handwriting of a madman. The journal belonged to Dr. Hayes, a surgeon from the hospital's early days. Anaya's blood ran cold as she read his words. Hayes had been obsessed with immortality, performing twisted experiments on his patients. The symbols, the rituals, it all pointed to a terrifying truth. Dr. Hayes's spirit still haunted Operating Theatre 4, his thirst for eternal life unquenched. Confronting the past, A cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging Anaya into darkness. A figure coalesced from the shadows, tall and gaunt, with eyes that glowed with an eerie light. Dr. Hayes, his voice, a raspy whisper, echoed in the darkness. "You should not be here," he hissed. "Leave this place or suffer the consequences." Anaya's fear threatened to consume her, but she clung to her courage. She had stumbled upon a terrifying truth, and she wouldn't let Dr. Hayes continue his reign of terror. "Your time is over, Hayes," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I won't let you hurt anyone else." Breaking the spell. Hayes lunged, his spectral hand reaching for her throat. Anaya stumbled backward, her hand closing around a scalpel that had fallen from the table. The metal was ice-cold, but it gave her a surge of desperate courage. She had to act fast. Remembering the journal, she knew she had to destroy the source of Hayes's power, the ritualistic carvings on the floor. She threw herself towards the door, the scalpel flashing in the darkness as she frantically scratched at the symbols. The air crackled with energy, and Hayes screamed in fury as his form flickered, his grip on the physical world weakening. Finally, with a deafening crack, the symbol shattered, and Hayes' presence vanished. Silence descended upon Operating Theatre 4, heavier than before, the lingering shadow. Anaya staggered out of the operating room, the weight of her experience heavy on her shoulders. The events of the night had left her shaken, her mind replaying the gruesome scenes over and over. She had always known that being a surgeon came with its challenges, but nothing had prepared her for the horrors she had faced in Operating Theatre 4. The next morning she resigned from Durham General, unable to forget the horrors she had witnessed. Her resignation letter was brief, but it spoke volumes about the trauma she had endured. She knew she couldn't continue working in a place that held such dark memories. The hospital continued to operate, but Operating Theatre 4 remained sealed, its door bolted shut. The administration had decided it was best to keep it closed, hoping to bury the past and move on. But the memories of what had happened there were not so easily forgotten. The staff avoided it, their whispers a constant reminder of the unspeakable secrets hidden within. Rumours spread like wildfire, each story more terrifying than the last. The once bustling hallway outside the theatre was now a place of hushed conversations and fearful glances. Some things are best left undisturbed. The abandoned wing of the hospital stood as a silent testament to that truth. It was a place where the past lingered, a shadow that refused to fade. The darkness that had taken root in Operating Theatre 4 might have been quelled, but the memory of Dr. Hayes and his gruesome legacy continued to haunt the corridors of Durham General. His photograph, once a symbol of pride, now served as a grim reminder of the hospital's darkest days. And Anaya Patel knew deep in her heart that some wounds never truly heal. She often found herself lost in thought, staring out of windows, wondering if she would ever be able to move past the trauma. They fester in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to bleed again. The hospital, with its dark corners and hidden secrets, was a constant reminder that some shadows never truly disappear.